I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The engine hummed beneath me, headlights illuminating the dark road ahead. But I didn't move. My hands refused to shift into drive, as if my body was still catching up to the reality my mind had already accepted. I was leaving and I wasn't coming back. The house behind me loomed in the rearview mirror, silent and still. I had memorized every creak in its floors, every corner of its walls, the scent of coffee in the morning, the way the light filtered through the curtains. It had been my home for years. Our home. But now all I could feel was suffocation. Inside, she was probably asleep. Oblivious. Completely unaware that this was the last night she'd ever spend as my wife. Lorna. The name echoed in my mind, a name that once brought me comfort, warmth, love. Now it felt like a brand seared into my skin, something I wanted to rip away. I had spent the last few hours in a haze, packing a single bag with shaking hands, double-checking every piece of evidence that had led me to this moment. The text messages. The receipts. The undeniable proof of her betrayal. It had all started with a simple gut feeling, a whisper in the back of my mind that told me something was wrong. And now here I was, staring at the truth in all its ugly, undeniable clarity. She had been seeing someone else. Lying to my face with effortless ease. Coming home to me after spending hours with him, pretending like nothing had changed. I felt sick. It wasn't just about the act of betrayal itself, it was about the erosion of trust, the way she had rewritten our past without me even realizing it. How many nights had she whispered I love you with a lie still fresh on her lips? How many times had I held her, thinking she was mine, when in reality she had already given herself to someone else? I exhaled shakily and wiped a hand down my face. There was no point in confronting her. No amount of shouting or accusations would undo what she had done. I had seen enough men fall into that trap, screaming for answers they already knew, clinging to a sinking ship. I refused to be that man. So instead, I did what she never saw coming. I left. No note. No final words. Just silence. I gripped the gear shift and forced myself to press the gas pedal. The car rolled forward, and with every foot of distance, the weight on my chest lifted just a little. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look back. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror. And so did the life I had once known. The further I drove, the lighter I felt. The city lights faded behind me, swallowed by the darkness of the open road, and yet the storm inside me refused to settle. I had expected some sort of clarity, some feeling of relief. After all, I had done the hard part, I had walked away. But my thoughts kept circling back to Lorna, to the life I had just abandoned. I forced myself to focus on the road. It was late, and the highway stretched endlessly ahead, the empty lanes mirroring the emptiness I felt inside. I should have been exhausted, drained from the emotional roller coaster of the last few days, but adrenaline kept me wired. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel as I tried to process what had happened, but no matter how many times I replayed it in my mind, the betrayal still felt surreal. It had started with something so small, so insignificant, that I had almost ignored it. A shift in her behavior. A moment of hesitation when I asked about her day. The way she suddenly started guarding her phone like it was her lifeline. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That I was being paranoid. That after years of marriage, it was normal for things to change. But then came the lies. She had always been a bad liar, but she had never needed to be good at it before. We had built our relationship on trust, or at least that's what I believed. So when she started tripping over her own stories, when the details stopped lining up, when I caught her in contradictions she couldn't explain away, the doubt started creeping in. Still, I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because the alternative, the idea that my wife, the woman I had loved for so long, was betraying me, was too painful to accept. So I did what every fool in love does. I ignored the signs. I told myself she was just stressed, that work was getting to her, that I was reading too much into things. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, whether you're ready for it or not. It happened last week. She was in the shower, and her phone, usually glued to her side, was left unattended on the nightstand. The screen lit up, a single message appearing at the top. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. A single sentence. That was all it took. I remember staring at the message, my entire body frozen. My mind tried to rationalize it, to come up with some excuse, some explanation that wouldn't shatter my world. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't meant for her. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I unlocked her phone. She had never changed her passcode, which somehow made it worse. As if she truly believed I would never suspect her. And the moment I opened her messages, my worst fears were confirmed. There were dozens of them. Weeks worth of exchanges, some explicit, some painfully tender. Compliments, inside jokes, confessions of feelings she had never spoken to me. I felt like an intruder reading through conversations that had no place in my marriage. The shower shut off. I barely had time to lock her phone and place it back before she stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, her hair dripping onto the floor. She smiled at me, completely unaware that in the span of 5 minutes my entire perception of her had changed. I played along. I pretended nothing had happened because I needed time to think. Time to process. Confronting her then and there wouldn't have solved anything, it would have only led to denial, to gaslighting, to her twisting the truth until I didn't know what to believe anymore. So I waited. I spent the next few days watching her, studying her, listening for the cracks in her mask. And now here I was, driving away from the wreckage, leaving her behind before she even realized I was gone. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A part of me knew it was her before I even looked. I hesitated before glancing at the screen. "Lorna, where are you?" I exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel tighter. She knew. Maybe she had woken up and found the closet half empty. Maybe she had noticed the note I almost left but decided against. But it didn't matter. I wasn't answering. I was done. And for the first time in years, I was free. The gas station was nearly empty when I pulled in, its flickering neon sign casting a pale glow over the cracked pavement. I killed the engine, sitting there for a moment as the ticking of the cooling motor filled the silence. My hand still gripped the steering wheel like I was bracing for impact, but there was nothing left to collide with. The crash had already happened. My life as I had known it was over. I stepped out into the cool night air, stretching my stiff legs as I scanned the quiet surroundings. It was one of those places that felt stuck in time, a relic of a forgotten era, dusty vending machines humming under buzzing fluorescent lights, a lone truck parked at the far end, its driver nowhere in sight. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and old asphalt, a scent that somehow grounded me in the present. I walked into the small convenience store, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. The clerk, a tired-looking guy in his late 50s, barely glanced up from his magazine. He had the look of someone who had seen enough people come and go to stop caring about their stories. I envied him for that. Grabbing a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels, I made my way to the counter. As the clerk rang me up, I pulled out my phone. 11 missed calls. All from Lorna. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. She knew I was gone. She was panicking. But what did she expect? That I'd just pretend everything was fine? That I'd come home, let her wrap her arms around me and let her lies continue? I clenched my jaw and shoved the phone back into my pocket. I wasn't ready to deal with her. Not yet. "Long night?" the clerk asked, finally looking up at me. His voice was gruff but not unkind. I hesitated, then exhaled a dry laugh. "You have no idea." He nodded like he understood, though he didn't ask for details. I appreciated that. Some wounds didn't need to be poked at. As I stepped back outside, the night felt colder, the weight of exhaustion settling in my bones. I leaned against my car, staring up at the sky. The stars were barely visible through the haze of city light in the distance, but out here, the world felt bigger, quieter. I thought about the last time I had felt truly happy. Not just content, but that deep, unshakable kind of happiness. The kind that makes you believe in forever. Had it been a specific moment? A summer night spent laughing on the porch? The way she used to look at me when I walked through the door? Or had it been a lie all along, a mirage I had been too blinded by love to see through? My phone vibrated again. I ignored it. But then a new message popped up, one that made my stomach twist. "Lorna, please. I need to talk to you. It's not what you think. Not what I think." My breath came out in a sharp exhale. I had seen the messages. The secret meetups. The way she spoke to him in a way she hadn't spoken to me in years. What exactly did she think I was misunderstanding? I turned my phone off and tossed it onto the passenger seat before climbing back into the car. I wasn't going back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. And yet, as I pulled out of the station and back onto the road, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my chest, the part of me that still wanted answers even if I knew they wouldn't change anything. The further I drove, the more the exhaustion started creeping in, sinking into my bones like a slow poison. I had been running on adrenaline for hours, but now, my body was reminding me that I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten anything except for a handful of pretzels, and hadn't allowed myself to process what had truly happened. I was a man in motion, but motion didn't mean I was moving forward, it just meant I was escaping. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, a black ribbon cutting through the darkness. My headlights illuminated the empty road, and for the first time since I had left, I wondered where exactly I was going. I had no destination. No plan. Just the knowledge that I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't be under the same roof as Lorna, knowing what I knew. But what did that mean? Would I drive until my gas ran out? Find some rundown motel and try to get a few hours of sleep before reality caught up with me? I didn't have an answer. Somewhere between the last gas station and the next stretch of highway, the memories started creeping in, uninvited and relentless. I remembered the first time I met Lorna. She had been different back then, lively, unpredictable, always challenging me in ways that made me want to be better. I had fallen hard, convinced that she was the person who would be by my side forever. I had imagined our future in vivid detail, our first home, our kids, the small traditions we would build together over the years. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that I had been wrong. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I thought about what I had seen on her phone. The messages weren't just meaningless flirtation. They weren't drunken mistakes or bad decisions made in moments of weakness. They were something worse, deliberate, calculated, intimate. You make me feel alive in ways he never has. That was the sentence that had gutted me the most. It was one thing to know she had been with someone else. But to know that she had compared me to him, measured me against him, and found me lacking? That was a different kind of pain. The worst part? I had loved her. Really, truly loved her. The kind of love that wasn't just about passion but about commitment, about showing up every single day even when things got hard. And she had thrown it away like it meant nothing. I checked my phone again out of habit even though I had told myself I wouldn't. More missed calls. More messages. The last one made my pulse spike. Lorna, I'm scared. Please answer me. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the message. Scared of what? That I was gone? That she might actually have to face the consequences of her actions? Or was this just another manipulation, another way to reel me back in? I had seen this pattern before. The way people like her twisted the truth, made themselves the victim, convinced you that you were the one being unreasonable. I wasn't falling for it. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and forced myself to focus on the road. I needed to keep going. Find somewhere to sleep for a few hours. Regain some sense of control. But even as I pressed the gas pedal and watched the city lights disappear behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The neon vacancy sign outside the roadside motel flickered like a dying firefly. It wasn't much peeling paint, a cracked parking lot with weeds growing through the concrete, but at that moment it was exactly what I needed. A place to stop. A place to think. A place where I could pretend, at least for a few hours, that my life wasn't unraveling. I pulled into a spot near the entrance and shut off the engine, sitting in the silence for a moment before finally stepping out. The night air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt, and in the distance, thunder rumbled low across the sky. A storm was coming. Fitting. Inside, the motel lobby was empty except for a bored-looking woman behind the counter, her eyes barely glancing up from her phone as I approached. She looked like she had seen it all, runaways, drifters, people like me who showed up in the middle of the night looking for a place to disappear. Just one night, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. She barely glanced at it before tapping on the old computer. Cash or card? Cash. I had withdrawn a good chunk before leaving. I wasn't stupid, I knew she could track me if I left a paper trail. She handed me the key, her nails clicking against the desk. Room 12. Checkout's at 11. Ice machine's broken. I nodded, taking the key without another word. As I turned to leave, I could feel her watching me as if trying to figure out what my story was. I didn't give her the satisfaction. The room was exactly what I expected. Stale air. A bedspread with an ugly floral pattern. A small, buzzing TV that barely worked. I tossed my bag onto the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling deeply. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't slow down. The phone vibrated again. I didn't have to look to know it was her. Lorna. I had spent years being her husband. Being the man who picked up her calls no matter what, who dropped everything when she needed me, who believed in her even when I probably shouldn't have. And yet here I was, alone in a motel room, wondering if I had ever really known her at all. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. I didn't answer, but I scrolled through the messages. Please talk to me. I don't understand why you're doing this. Just tell me where you are. Please. I clenched my jaw. The sheer audacity of it. Why I was doing this. She had betrayed me. She had lied to my face, kissed me goodnight while sneaking around behind my back. And now she was acting like I was the one who had done something wrong. I set the phone down, running a hand over my face. Sleep. I needed sleep. But my mind wouldn't let go of the last message she had sent. The one that was different from the others. I'm scared. Scared of what? Of being alone? Of what I might do? Or was there something else, something I hadn't considered? I shook my head. No. I wasn't going to let her mess with me. Not anymore. I kicked off my shoes, climbed under the covers, and closed my eyes. But as the storm rolled in outside, rain tapping against the window, I had a sinking feeling. Something wasn't right. The rain hit the motel window in uneven bursts, drumming against the thin glass like impatient fingers. I turned onto my side, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. My body was drained, my muscles aching from hours on the road, but my mind refused to shut off. Sleep was supposed to be my escape, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not the Lorna I had left behind, but the one I used to love, the one I thought I knew. The way she'd wrinkle her nose when she laughed. The way she used to pull me back into bed on lazy Sunday mornings, pressing her body against mine, whispering about how we had nowhere to be. How many of those mornings had been real? How many of those moments were already tainted with lies? I forced my eyes open, staring at the ceiling as the dim glow from the neon motel sign flickered against the walls. I needed to stop thinking about her. I had made my choice. I had left. And yet, no matter how much distance I put between us, she was still in my head. I sat up, rubbing my hands over my face. The clock on the nightstand glowed an angry 3:12 a.m. I had barely dozed off, but the restlessness was unbearable. My phone sat on the table, dark and silent, but I knew if I picked it up, I'd see her messages waiting. And I was right. When I turned the screen on, there were more than a dozen missed calls. Some from her. Some from numbers I didn't recognize. But one message stood out. "Lorna, if you don't answer, I don't know what I'm going to do." My heart clenched, but I told myself it was another trick. Another way to pull me back in. She wanted a reaction, wanted me to be the guy who always came running. And for years, I had been exactly that. But not anymore. I tossed the phone back onto the nightstand and stood up. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with unspoken thoughts and memories I didn't want. I needed air. Pulling on my jacket, I stepped outside, breathing in the scent of wet pavement. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a couple of old trucks and my car sitting under the weak glow of the streetlights. Everything felt too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that made your instincts buzz. I walked toward my car, not really sure why. Maybe just to feel like I was doing something. Maybe to remind myself that I was in control. But when I reached it, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. A single envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I froze, staring at it. My mind raced through possibilities. It wasn't there when I checked in. The rain had soaked the edges, but the paper itself was still mostly dry, meaning it hadn't been sitting there long. Slowly, I pulled it free, my pulse hammering in my ears. My name was written across the front in familiar handwriting. Lorna. My breath caught in my throat. How? How did she know where I was? Had she followed me? Or had someone told her? A cold dread crept up my spine as I turned the envelope over and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, the ink smudged in places from the rain. But the message was clear. You don't understand everything. Please talk to me before it's too late. Too late? My stomach twisted as I scanned the parking lot again, suddenly feeling exposed. Had she been here? Was she still watching me? Or worse, was someone else? I crumpled the note in my fist, shoving it into my jacket pocket. I should have been angry. Furious. But instead, all I felt was unease. Because for the first time since I left, I started to wonder if I had missed something. And that terrified me. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but my thoughts were even more tangled. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, the rhythmic tapping against the windshield almost hypnotic. I kept driving, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest since finding that note on my car. Lorna had always been a complicated person, impulsive, unpredictable, but I had never thought of her as someone who would go to extremes. The fact that she had tracked me down this quickly unsettled me. I wasn't sure if it was determination or desperation, but either way, it meant she wasn't ready to let go. I checked my phone again. More missed calls. Another message from Ben. Call me. You need to hear this. A part of me wanted to ignore it. I had done my part. I had walked away. But something about his urgency made me pause. With a sigh, I pulled into a quiet rest stop, parked beneath a street lamp, and finally hit dial. Then answered on the first ring. Orson. Yeah, I said, rubbing a hand over my face. What's going on? A beat of silence. Then, Lorna's gone. My grip on the phone tightened. Gone? She left town, he said. Took off in the middle of the night. No one knows where she went. A strange mix of relief and confusion settled over me. I had expected her to keep chasing me, to keep trying to pull me back. But this wasn't like her. She didn't say anything? I asked. Ben hesitated. Not to me. But she told Mom she needed a fresh start. Said she needed to figure things out on her own. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the seat. Maybe she had finally accepted it was over. Maybe in some strange way she was doing what I had done, disappearing to start over. Look, Ben continued, his voice softer now, I don't know what happened between you two and I'm not asking. But if she left, maybe it's for the best. Maybe now you can move on. Move on. The words felt foreign, like a concept I hadn't fully grasped yet. But as I sat there, watching the rain drizzle down the windshield, I realized something. I already had. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. I had driven until exhaustion forced me to stop, pulling into a quiet little town with streets that still felt untouched by time. It wasn't home, but that was the point. I wasn't looking for a reminder of the past, I was looking for something new. I checked into a small roadside inn, the kind where the front desk clerk barely looked up from his newspaper as he handed me the key. The room was simple but clean. The kind of place where no one asked questions. I like that. For the first time in days, I turned my phone off. No more messages. No more missed calls. Just silence. I stood by the window watching as the town slowly came to life, shop owners unlocking their doors, a few early risers walking their dogs, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. It was peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace too. Lorna was in my past now. Whatever she had been running from, whatever reasons she had for leaving, they were no longer my concern. She had made her choices. I had made mine. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air. I didn't know what was next. I didn't have a grand plan. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out.